Good morning, Coach J. Good morning, classmate. So now, before we will start our topic, I will introduce you guys, my group mates. I am Maria Angela Cotton, the little teacher of Study Hub number 7. The first reporter, Mr. Ralph Lawrence Felix, assigned the cognitive and metacognitive factors. The next reporter, Miss Maria Angela Cotton, assigned motivational and affective factors. And the next reporter, Miss Gian Ramos, assigned the developmental and social factor. And the last reporter, Miss Ridzma Jawali, assigned the individual differences factors. So now, we will start tackled about the learn-centered psychological principles.
Hello to everyone, especially to Coach J. I'm gonna be the first reporter, Felix Ralph Lawrence C. from BS Ed Math 1R. We have 4 topics, but I will be the first reporter. So I'm going to discuss today's video, the cognitive and metacognitive. So it consists of 6 principles which include nature of the learning process, goals of the learning process, construction of knowledge, strategic thinking, thinking about thinking, context of learning. So, first principle, the nature of learning process. The learning of complex subject matter is most effective when it is an intentional process of constructing meaning from information and experience. I want to emphasize intentional process. This is actually happening inside the classroom, that you're learning they're most intentional. Why did I say so? Because your teacher coming to your class with an end in mind. So he or she has already the objectives lesson what you'll be learning right after the class. He or she has already the strategies they approaches he or she can use in order for those objectives to be met, and he has already designed assessment tasks to know you were to learn the lesson or not. So it's intentional process. Another important terms here is constructing meaning. As educator, we go inside the classroom not just to feed our learners. We have our learners to use the knowledge we acquired, experience, or to construct meaning. They will become a creators of knowledge, creator of meaning. That's the nature of the learning process. We don't have to feed the student, but we help them become constructivists. The second principle, goals of the learning process. The successful learner, over time and with support and instructional guidance, can create meaningful, coherent representations of knowledge. So what are the goals of the learning process? So it's kindly related for the first one. So as educator, we have to help our learners set their own learning goals. It's not only the teacher who set the learning goals, but also the learners or student set their learning goals. They will become more committed. As a teacher, we must help our student link their short-term goal to long-term goal. So they need to realize this short-term goal that they have would lead to attainment their long-term goal. The third principle, construction of knowledge. The successful learner can link new information with existing knowledge in meaningful ways. Learner learns a lot of things. Learner learns different disciplines: math, English, social science, social study, geography, history, etc. They learn also from other people. They learn also from their environment. There's a lot of source of knowledge, but this subject or discipline are not actually isolated. They are always connected with one another. As a teacher, we have we have them to connect the new lesson or the new learning that they have to do the previous lesson so that we can construct meaningful learning. That's the construction of knowledge. The fourth principle is strategic thinking. The successful learner can create and use a repertoire of thinking and reasoning strategies to achieve complex learning goals. This more on experience because a lot of time, whenever Coach J gave context tasks to us, some of us really complain. We first complain before we comply because we think that is very hard to do and then there's a lot of things to do. There's no enough time, but a successful learner would complain but would see that as an opportunity for us to learn because we have strategic thinking. In first plan is very difficult a day, but an unsuccessful learner can make use of strategic thinking. How can we achieve this one? For example, our task is speech presentation from a lot of students. If we're not into that, if we're not in public speaking, we will still complain, but you're a successful learner. We will not complain, but we think strategies how we are going to develop ourselves if we are not good in public speaking. Probably can start practicing with ourselves listening to our speech. Looking ourselves in front of the mirror. After that, we can invite people in our house to see our speech performance to give constructive feedback in order to improve more our performance. The fifth principle, thinking about thinking. Higher order strategies for selecting and monitoring mental operation facilitate creative and critical thinking. Thinking about thinking. In other words, this is called metacognition. As a student, we must have the ability to monitor our learning and assess strategies of learning whether it is effective or not. Thinking about thinking or assessing our own learning strategies whether effective or not. The sixth principle, context of learning. Learning is influenced by environmental factors, including culture, technology, and instructional practices. I want to emphasize this could affect learning, culture, technology, and instructional practice. As teacher, you must sensitive with the culture of the student. So make sure that when whatever culture background we have, whatever belief we have, you must to really accept those and you must sensitive to our culture because they're most quality inside our classroom. Technology as well. We have to use or we really maximize technology in order for us to boost learning. We can use technology for searching, for presenting our lesson, so and so forth. Instructional practices. Definitely, we have the quality of the teachers really matter when it comes to learning. These factors could influence learning process.
Good morning, Coach J. Good morning, classmate. And now, I will present my topic, motivational and affective factors. There are three kinds of motivational and affective factors. First is motivational and emotional influences on learning. Second, intrinsic motivation to learn. third, effects of motivation on effort. Motivational and emotional influences on learning. What and how much is learned is influenced by the learner's motivation. Motivation to learn, in turn, is influenced by the individual's emotional states, belief, interests, and goals and habits of thinking. So, in this case, motivation has a direct impact on how an individual learns. The effects of motivation is normally far-reaching because it increases an individual's energy well, determines the persistence in reaching specific goals, affects the types of learning techniques used and an individual's thinking processes. Next, intrinsic motivation to learn. The learner's creativity, higher order thinking, and natural curiosity all contribute to motivation to learn. Intrinsic motivation is stimulated by task or optimal novelty and difficulty, relevant to personal interest and providing for personal choice and control. Um, Intrinsic motivation to learn is the curiosity, flexible, and insightful thinking, and creativity are major indicators of the learners. Intrinsic motivation to learn, which is large part a function of meeting basic needs to be competent and to exercise personal control. Intrinsic motivation is facilitated on tasks that learners perceive as interesting and personally relevant and meaningful, appropriate in complexity and difficulty to the learner's abilities, and on which they believe they can succeed. Intrinsic motivation is also facilitated on tasks that are comparable to real-world situations and meet needs for choice and control. Educators can encourage and support learners' natural curiosity and motivation to learn by attending to individual differences in learning perceptions of optimal novelty and difficulty, relevance and personal choice and control. Next is effects of motivation on effort. Acquisition of complex knowledge and skills requires extended learner effort and guided practice. Without learners' motivation to learn, the willingness to exert this effort is unlikely without coercion. So, the effects of motivation on effort. Um, Effort is another major indicator of motivation to learn. The acquisition of complex knowledge and skills demands the investment of considerable learner energy and strategic effort. Along with persistent overtime, educators need to be concerned with facilitating motivation by strategies that enhance learner effort and commitment to learning and to achieving high standards of comprehension and understanding. Um, The effective strategies include purposeful learning activities guided by practices that enhance positive emotions and intrinsic motivation to learn, and methods that increase learners' perceptions that a task is interesting and personally relevant. So that's all my topic for today. And now, I will introduce you the next reporter about the developmental and social factor, which is Miss Gian Ramos.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Coach Jay. I am the next reporter. I am Jen Clarissa Ramos. I will going to discuss the developmental and social factors. Developmental and social factor. This factor contribute to the mind growth by systematically rewarding learning for their efforts. Emotional, intellectual, and physical developmental component in the conception of maturity. This component contributes to a dynamic interaction between a person and their surroundings. This factor actually influences our mind, especially on our way of thinking. As we expect more effort from learning, we should also guarantee that we reward ourselves from it. Developmental influence on learning. As individuals develop, they encounter different opportunities and experience different constraints for learning. Learning is most effective when differential development within and across physical, intellectual, emotional, and social domain is taken into account. This means that when a person faces an opportunity, it gives him the ability to develop simply because this person gained knowledge from it and also experience. This person is learning, which means his use or exercise his physical, mental, intellectual, emotional, social domains, which is significant in his developmental process. Social influences on learning. Learning is influenced by social interaction, interpersonal relations, and communication with others. No one is an island. Why? Because every one of us we depend with each other through communication, a process of exchanging truth and ideas. We grow up systematically by the influence in our surrounding or environment.
Hello, Coach Jay. Hello, everyone. I am Rizma Jawali, a first year student from CGPSU. And for today's video, we are going to tackle my assigned topic, which is about individual differences factors. So, there are three individual differences factors. The first one is individual differences in learning. The second one is learning and diversity. And the third one is standard and assessment. So, we are now on individual differences in learning. Learners have different strategies, approaches, and capability for learning that are function of prior experience and heredity from APA 1997. So, in a classroom, we could see how the student would use different strategies and making activities that the teacher did. So, as a teacher, you have to accept and respect it because, as we said, is based on their backgrounds or their performance are based on their backgrounds and heredity. So, it means that whatever they have learned at home or whatever strategies they learn from their parents, those strategies or approaches are basically what they use into the learning process in school. Next, diversity is a natural part of life. Yes, we are a diverse world, and we could say that we are a unique creation of God. Everyone has really having differences, and we are diverse, or we have differences in our lives, are what I have said earlier. Next, each learner has his or her learning style, intelligence, potential, skills, talents, learning preferences, as well as cognitive abilities, which are effects of both experiences and heredity. So, for instance, you have a student from a family of doctor, teacher, or from a family of a professional, you could see them and how they act and how they approach into a certain situation. And compared to a student from a simple living, you could also see them as how they act into a certain situation. So we could see our student and how they perform, and basically those performance based on how the experience at home are based on their social interaction. Next, current trends in teaching. Encourage teachers to apply concept on multicultural teaching, differentiated instruction, DI, and the universal design for learning UDL. So, in a classroom, it is possible that we have students from the different place like Luzon or from Mindanao. So, for example, their culture and beliefs or tradition are different from what we experience in here in the Mindanao. And sometimes we have also different language. So we are mentioned differentiated instruction and universal design for learning so that the learners could relate even if there are differences that we could see. So as a teacher, you must use example or scenarios inside a classroom that everyone could relate. And lastly, as a teacher, you should not stick into one. You have to touch all your students or know them well. So we are done to the second factors, which is learning and diversity. Learning is most effective when differences is learning, linguistic, cultural, and social backgrounds are taken into account. APA in 1997. So since we are in a diverse world, we have to take into account or put into consideration the diverse that we have, the language, the culture, the backgrounds of learners. So basically, language can be a barrier in learning when learners cannot express themselves well, or or if it is they cannot relate to what they have, or it is not related to their social context. So for example, in a classroom, you gave an example from other country, and you cannot assure that all your students know or have watched the news about it. So they will possibly not get what you are talking about, or they could put themselves into the certain situation. You need to contextualize or localize the cases or situation, or cases and situation are localized or contextualized if using situation outside the countries. Make sure all the learners could get the point or can relate to the situation. Example, if you are presenting a literary thesis that you're different from what we have here in the Philippines, so they could not get the lessons from the certain situation. So as a teacher, you have to contextualize or localize even if are from the other countries or relate what into the perspective that we have here in the Philippines. And an inclusive classroom is one that welcomes and respects differences which are incorporated into their learning activities. So learners should be part of it or related to each other and relate to what the teachers is talking about and can understand to the learners or the discussion being discussed. So again, because of the diversity that linguistic or the language, the culture or where the learners came and the social backgrounds or how they socialize with their families, classmates, and other people should be valued, accepted, and respect for them, not to feel discriminated, to have a meaningful learning process. So we are now on the third factors, which is standard and assessment. Setting a appreciably high and challenging standard and assessing the learners as well as the learning. Process including diagnosis, process, and outcome assessment are integral parts of the learning process. APA 1997. So as a teacher, you are not just to teach, but also you need to evaluate and assess the learners because the results are used to identify the learner's strength, weakness, limitation, and also the difficulties of the learners. Moreover, the teacher would also know the use of support the learners need based on the result of the assessment. So in a classroom, basically, a teacher would give three kinds of assessment: that diagnostic are given before the lessons, the formative during is to assess the learner's important, and summative given after the discussion. And it is for the teacher also to know which part that the learners learn and which part they have struggled or the learners would not able to understand. And next is assessment should be ongoing process. So assessment should be ongoing process as we have mentioned that basically in the classroom the teacher would give the diagnostic, formative, and summative tests to monitor the process and to identify the barriers that learners have in the achieving their goals. Lastly, assessment is for both teachers and learners. It is both for teachers and learners because through it learners would know their weakness and strength, and for the teacher to improve the strategies and techniques in delivering the lessons to have many meaningful learning process.